Hello and welcome to this lecture on Adobe Illustrator by Eduonix Technologies. In this lecture we're going to be going into the Transform tool and the many ways of transforming objects, which you learned how to create in the last few episodes of these lectures. So right now I've drawn a simple square and we're going to be transforming it in a number of different ways. I'm going to go over what I consider to be the less useful ones first. So let's start off with the Transform panel, and I've dragged it out so that I can have it right here next to my shape. And I'm going to zoom in too, since I have such a big screen here. If you can't see the Transform panel, simply go up to Window and down to Transform. It's also Shift F8. So what the Transform panel does is it tells me the amount from the left side of my document and the amount of the right from the top of my document that this object is. And it's referring to the left side of the object and the top of the object. Not very useful, but there may be applications where you might have to use it. I've had to use it maybe once. It's only when you have to have really exact measurements. What is useful over here is, since this is a panel and it can just lock right in, is these measurements, these input boxes where you can make this an exact size without having to use rules or guides or anything. And if I click this, then whenever I change the size of this to 4, for instance, the other one will follow suit. This is just constrain width and height proportions. It means it'll keep these the same based on what you type into one of them. So once again, this is one of the ones I don't use that often. But what is important here are scale strokes and effects and align to pixel grid. As you can see in the little pop-up description, align to pixel grid prevents blurry lines. It makes sure that the images are aligned to the actual pixels, so you don't have a corner that's crossing over 2 pixels, for example. You would use this when you're doing something that's really small, or it's going to be printed. A lot of reasons, even for web. Scale strokes and effects is probably where you'll go to the Transform panel for the most. And I keep mine on most of the time, but it basically means if you have a line, a stroke, for instance, this is a 1-point stroke, and if I have this on, when I make my square smaller, the stroke will also get smaller. As you can see now it's 4.486. Now I'm going to drag this back over here right next to my shape. So that's the Transform panel. That's the Transform panel. So I'm going to close out of that, and I'm going to show you the other way you can transform. This is a little bit, although I do like to have that panel up when I'm doing a lot of transformations. You might like to as well. I don't know. You click on your object, and I'm going to give it a stroke and a fill here. When you click on your object, you can go up to Object, and a lot of options are highlighted. One of them is Transform. So here we can enter in where to move the object. It's not useful in my opinion at all, since you can just drag things. Here we can enter an exact rotation. Pretty simple. And here we can reflect. This is about the only option I use, is reflect off of the actual object panel under Transform. And that's because I can get a quick reflection without having to use the free Transform and let the smart guides line up. Shear is useful, particularly for creating boxes and sides to things. Creating anything in perspective, it helps out. It's something you'll be using a lot. And also, just if you wanted to make an image fit like on the face of another image that's turned slightly, you would use the shear command. But I'm going to show you a much easier way, and this is going to be the focus of the transform tutorial, is that's freeze transform. And I just hit shortcut key E, and that'll bring up a bounding box that means your object is currently in free transform mode. Just to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to change its color to red. So in free transform mode, I can do a number of things. When I'm holding my mouse outside the object, anywhere outside actually, I can rotate it. Do that just by clicking and dragging. You can see the angle of your rotation down in the lower right corner of the cursor. When I click shift, it obeys the constraint angle that you can set up under preferences. Underneath general, it's the second option. So you can set that up to snap into whatever you want. When it's set to 0, it defaults to 45. Now if I hold my cursor over the corner and I drag out, it'll resize the object. Also, if I hold it right over the side, and note, I'm just holding it over the white squares that you see. It doesn't do the same thing if you hold it over the line. So the same rules apply with shift. It drags it out evenly, no matter if I move my cursor to the left or right, since I'm going up and down. It knows that. Alt will make it come out from the center. Since I'm pulling down on the one side, the other one's going up equally. Now when I hit Control, it'll skew. Since I have smart guides on, I can know the exact angle of the skew. Now there's a few more things you can do in transform mode, or free transform as they used to call it. When I hover over one of the anchors and I click on it, if I press Control and drag out to the right, it's just dragging that anchor now. If I hold in Shift, it'll keep it generally stuck to the top, although I can do this as well while still holding in Shift. If I hold in Alt, I can create shapes like this. Now I'm going to show you how to reflect something using just the transform tool. First, I'm going to copy this object, making sure all the anchor points are selected. Click on the inside of it, making sure they're all darkened in. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it in front. That's Control C and Control F, or Command C, Command F on a Mac. Now I'm going to hit E for free transform, and I'm going to hold in Alt while I click on any one of these sides, and that's holding in Option on a Mac. And now notice, it'll lock into place if you have smart guides and snap to activated right here on the other side, and that's how I know I've reflected it completely. So I'm going to let go of the mouse before I let go of the Alt key. Now I'm just going to click on one of these anchors, or I can actually even click on just this path, and I'm going to drag it up. When I get it up here, generally what you do with the reflection, then you actually maybe make this into a reflection. Maybe you join these two. This is the way you took to get a hexagon. But that's basically the free transform tool. There's a lot you can do with it. So another thing to note about it is that when you select two objects and you hit free transform tool or E, it'll treat them just like one object. Here I'm going to click, I'm going to hold down Alt and Control in different combinations. So really experiment with it. Make sure you have your smart guides and your snap twos on, and that would be up here under view. Make sure you have smart guides selected. Also make sure pixel preview is off so you can see them. And I usually have it just to snap to point since we're not using a grid. So play around with different shapes and make sure you're, like always, using the Control, the Alt, and the Shift tool, because it's going to make your life a lot easier than using this. For instance, if I wanted to make this really fat at the base, I'm holding in Control, Shift, and Alt, and I hit that right after I clicked the bottom bounding box square. But there is a way that you can edit things in a more advanced way, although it's a little bit less specific. That's the envelope distort option. And I'm going into this in my transform video because it's another method of transforming objects. So first let's take a look at Make with Warp. This has a number of options. They all have sliders. You're going to have to play around with these because there's a lot of options, but they give you a good idea of, in the little icon next to them, of what they do. For instance, this will arc the entire object. Well, this will just arc the upper part of it and leave the bottom leave the bottom as kind of an anchor. This will kind of do the same thing to both sides. Let's pick one, like flag here. Always click preview so you can see it. And by adjusting this slider right here, if I go back to 0, that's normal, and I can go left or I can go right. Now these sliders down here will, well, let's just show you. Horizontal distortion, drag to the right, and drag to the left. And vertical distortion, dragged to the right, which is distorting the bottom part of the image, and drag to the left, which is distorting the top, making it bigger according to how far I slide it. And this will give you a number of different options. As you can see, it's pretty easy to understand just from looking at the icons. So go ahead and play around with that. You can come up with some really interesting shapes. It's all a matter of using your creativity and imagination as well. One thing to note is that after you've used Envelope Distort, you have to go to Envelope Distort and Expand to make it into an object again. As you can see, the Envelope Distort is still active on it. You can also go up to Envelope Distort and Release to make it let go of your shape. Some more methods of transforming. As you can see, this just popped up out of nowhere because I'm going to show you really quick. First is transform each, and the next will be warp with object. And this will be the object we're going to be warping these green rectangles I drew with. Now, I just selected all 5 of the green rectangles. I want to warp each of them independently, bringing them down, making them narrower so that there's an even amount of white and green. So I'll go up to Object, Transform, down to Transform Each, or Alt, Shift, Control, D. I think it's easier to go up to Object though. And now this is going to transform them just like I have one selected for each of them. It's pretty self-explanatory. So let's scale them horizontally and turn on preview. Down a little bit, or I'm sorry, vertically. You can use your mouse wheel to fine-tune it. So I'm going to scale them vertically, and since I have this, it's scaling them from the center. If I click up here, it'll scale them from the top. If I click down here, it'll scale them from the bottom. If I click down here, it'll scale them from the lower left corner. That's what this little thing does right here. So since I'm scaling horizontally from the center, it's bringing them in from the top and the bottom. If I scaled horizontally and I had this selected, it would just bring it in from the bottom. So now, as you can see, they're narrower. It did them all equally. It's very useful. And now what I'm going to show you is to warp this by using an object, which is a form of transforming. So I have it in front. If your object's not in front, and we'll go into this in later videos, it's Control or Command bracket. Control Shift bracket will bring it all the way to the back. Control Shift bracket will bring it all the way to the front. Anyway, you'll figure all that out again when you watch the videos, further videos. So we're going to go to Object, Envelope Distort, Make with Top Object, and look what happens. Once again, if I want to make this into a new shape, since it's currently a process shape, I'm going to go up to Object, Envelope Distort, and Expand. The reason why this is unusual is because normally you would go to Object, Expand, but for envelope distortions, it works differently. And now each of these is its own little shape. The last little trick I'm going to show you is how to transform and then reset your bounding boxes. The reason for this is it's useful to have bounding boxes that are 90 degrees up and down. But if I were to rotate this 45 degrees, my bounding box is also going to be 45 degrees. So all you do to reset your bounding box is go up to Object, Transform, and Reset Bounding Box. Now you can see it's a square again. It's particularly useful when you're turning things very specific angles. There we got negative 4.77, because 45 and 0 are pretty easy to work with in reality, especially considering my snap 2 is set to that. But you'll find a time where you'll need to reset that bounding box, or you won't want it going. A good example is if I want to stretch this in its current form left and right evenly using the free transform tool, I can't. I'm doing it just like it was when it was right side up. So I would go up to Reset Bounding Box, and as you can see here, now it's dragging it to the right. So I guess that's the most useful form of it, and you'll find that you'll be doing that quite a lot. And I've already talked for too much here, so that concludes this video on transforming. There's a lot more to do, and you'll pick up on that in further tutorials. But for now, just practice all those things I've shown you. Watch the video again and again and again, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.